The New York Times ran a piece today called "The Road to Coronavirus Hell Was Paved by Evangelicals." Evangelicals, okay, let me just ask a question. So the centers of the outbreak that we've seen thus far are China, famous for its huge evangelical Christian population, China. I mean, just tons of evangelicals over there. It's like a convention of religious evangelical Christians over in China, a communist atheist country. And then Italy, again, hugely famous for having tons of evangelicals in Italy. Not like it's the home of the Catholic Church or anything. Like it's all evangelicals over in Italy. And in the United States, New York City, where evangelicals just swarm New York City. I know like probably 2/3 of the population of New York City is evangelical. Of course, I'm being a little sarcastic here, and by a little, I mean a lot. But if you're blaming evangelicals for the outbreak of coronavirus, by the way, these are the same people, presumably, who would say that if you say Chinese virus, it's very, very racist. If you blame it on the government of China, very racist. But you blame the evangelicals. Evangelicals are sitting over here like, what in the world? Like us? Seriously? But the New York Times ran this piece anyway, because nothing says unifying the country like blaming evangelicals for coronavirus. Catherine Stewart, the author of The Power Worshippers Inside the Dangerous Rise of Religious Nationalism. So her priors are fairly well established. She says Donald Trump rose to power with the determined assistance of a movement that denies science, bashes government, and prioritizes loyalty over professional expertise. In the current crisis, we are all reaping what that movement has sown. At least since the 19th century, when the pro-slavery theologian Robert Louis Dabney attacked the physical sciences as theories of unbelief, hostility to science has characterized the more extreme forms of religious nationalism in the United States. Today, the hardcore of climate deniers is concentrated among people who identify as religiously conservative Republicans. And some leaders of the Christian nationalist movement, like those allied with Cornwall Alliance for the Steward of Creation, which has denounced environmental science as the cult of the Green Dragon, cast environmentalism as an alternative and false theology. This denial of science and critical thinking among religious ultra-conservatives now haunts the American response to the coronavirus crisis. What? Just going to point out, is Anthony Fauci, who stands next to Trump like every single day on the podium, is that guy like an evangelical Christian science denier? How about Deborah Birx? How about Jerome Adams, the guy who's the Surgeon General, that doctor? All of those guys are evangelicals? So Trump is listening to people who deny science totally, while also recommending what his scientists tell them? On March 15th, says this columnist, Guillermo Maldonado, who calls himself an apostle and hosted Mr. Trump earlier this year at a campaign event at his Miami megachurch, urged his congregants to show up for worship services in person. Do you believe God would bring his people to his house to be contagious with the virus? Of course not, he said. Okay, so your best evidence that Trump is following evangelical science deniers, your best evidence is that a guy who hosted Trump at a campaign event earlier this year said a thing now. Wow, strong evidence, New York Times. Really, really doing amazing work over here, blaming evangelicals for the rise of coronavirus. Okay, honestly, this is so tiresome. It's so unbelievably tiresome. In the middle of a pandemic, how about you put aside your hatred for evangelical Christians and you just say, listen, we're all Americans, we're all in this together, and we are all waiting for the data to come out as opposed to blame the Christians. Truly insane stuff from the New York Times, but there you have it, the New York Times doing its best to divide the country with their op-ed page in the middle of a pandemic. Really solid stuff there.